let's go ahead. I want you to take a minute to look at this picture. And when I think about good bugs, these are the things that I'm thinking about usually. Bumblebees and butterflies. And I am seeing so many fat, happy bumblebees right now. They are everywhere in my yard. And oh, he got unmuted. That's
Yay.
good. They look exactly like a bumblebee is supposed to look, like the one in this picture. And I think they're pretty amazing. A lot of our presentation today is going to be on good bugs, but I want you to think about a bad bug. Now look at this picture, and if you know what this is, I want you to put it in the chat box or unmute yourself and just tell us. What is this a picture of?
Spotted lanternfly.
Oh, spotted lanternfly, you're right. This is a very invasive, very bad bug. And we are getting a lot of information on this bug right now, on the spotted lanternfly. And everyone is concerned about this. So after the lanternfly is one word. I want you to remember that. And after the presentation, I would love for you to Google this bug or look it up on the internet and see what you can find out about it. We're just going to talk about it for a minute. It's native to Southeast Asia, so it is not native to the United States. How do you think it got here? If it's not native to the United States and it's native to Southeast Asia, that's a long way away. How would you guess that it got to the United States? Any comments on that?
Imported on deliveries of goods from Southeast Asia.
We get a lot of things that way, don't we? So very possibly imported on goods. It could even have been, some of them been on a crate, or they could have been on plants that were brought over. So there's just so many ways that they could have gotten here, and we're very, very concerned about them. They have wings as adults. They have two sets of wings, but they're actually plant hoppers. They can fly pretty high, but usually we think of them as being plant hoppers. They're very much like our native aphids or cicadas, which is another bug that we're thinking a lot about, are leaf hoppers. So they're very much like bugs that we have, but they are very distinct, and they have a few very distinct stages. I want you to look at the picture that's in the bottom middle of your screen. That's an egg mass that's on a tree. And this egg mass sort of looks like it's been plastered over. And that's really what it looks like. They do that to protect their eggs. So if you see something like this, I'm going to tell you who to contact in a little bit. But we're concerned because they feed on tree sap. After several years of intensive feeding, they can actually kill a tree. They can even weaken a tree, not kill it, but just weaken it so that other insects can get in the tree or diseases can get in the tree and kill it. And the thing that concerns us is there's no natural enemies for this lanternfly, this spotted lanternfly. And if you look at the stages, they're actually beautiful bugs. They really are. This is an adult bug on the top left, right of your screen. You see an adult bug with his wings closed. And then when they're open, they're beautiful. but they're very, very, very invasive. So let's think about the spotted lanternfly. Does anyone have any questions about the spotted lanternfly? Or does anyone, I mean, I just put a few things on the screen. We could do a huge presentation on this that would last a couple of hours. But because it's such a concern, I wanted to bring it up today and have you start looking into it. Any questions?
Shirley, I don't see any questions in the chat box at this time.
Okay, would anyone like to unmute and ask a question? If you see anything that looks like a spotted lanternfly, or if you see one of these egg masses on your trees that look like they're plastered over, you can contact Adria Bordas, who is our extension agent, and I'm going to show her email address toward the end of this presentation. Does anyone have any information that they would like to share about the spotted lanternfly? Oh, y'all are being very quiet today. I'm going to have to get y'all riled up about something so you'll talk more. We learn from each other, and I'm sure all of you have something you can teach me. So let's see. Sandra now is going to talk to us about bees and flies. And you know I love bees, but flies are also surprisingly beautiful insects. Okay, Sandra, are you ready to get started?
Ready.
Okay.
Okay, so as she said, I am really focusing more on the good bugs. It's not like I don't have a number of bad bugs in the garden, but I'm just really going to focus more on the bees and some of the flies. And we can go to the next slide, Shirley. So I know everyone sort of knows the bumblebee and the beloved bumblebee. I'm sure all of you know about the less than beloved carpenter bees that, you know, are always zooming around trying to find some untreated wood to nest in. And you probably know about the European honeybee, which is not new. But I focus more on the native bees and a couple of specifics. But in terms of the basics, they are bees that bees have a complete metamorphosis. In other words, they have egg, larva, pupa, and adult. There are between 400 and 500 different bee species in Virginia. Overall, they are docile creatures. The female is the only one that has a stinger. And just like most mamas of whatever species, if you are sort of near a nest or she feels threatened, then you may, but normally they really appreciate their business. 75% of the native bees are solitary. The female basically does it all. She prepares and maintains the nest on her own. She mates, she lays eggs, and fills the nest with pollen for the larva. The nests are built in a number of different places, in the ground, hollow stems, wood cavities, old beetle tunnels. And they tend to focus on one flower. It makes very successful pollen transfer as they zip from one flower to the next of the same species. And the nectar is what provides the sugar, and the pollen is the protein. And their bodies are equipped with special pollen-carrying structures on both their hind legs and on their abdomen. I mean, they're sort of hairy and they pick up the pollen quite nicely. They don't have a sense of smell and they only see ultraviolet colors. So they're going to see like purples, blues, whites, yellows, but not red. Next slide. So there are a couple I've just chosen to talk about briefly. One of them is the mason bees. They are quite small, about a ½ inch in length, metallic green, blue, or black, and they appear early in the spring. They feed on many different flowers, although some target the Rosaceae family. I don't know if I'm saying that right, which includes apples, cherries, plums, almonds. So if you have an ornamental cherry or something, you're likely to see these little guys on it. They nest in old beetle tunnels, hollow stems, holes in wood. And the name is derived from the way the female lays the eggs in a tunnel, and she seals each one with mud, placing the pollen in each cell for the larvae. So it's quite really labor intensive. She goes through quite a number of flowers to get that pollen to place in each one of those cells, but they're called mason bees. Next slide. And the other one I focused on, you can see a little picture of that. I'm sure you've seen those as well. Sweat bees, they're very small. It's only a few centimeters to maybe ½ an inch. Metallic black, shiny green, brown. They're attracted to salt. And so one may indeed land on your arm to lick the moisture off your arm, not to sting you. They're routinely seen from spring to fall. They're generalists, so they go to lots of different flowers, and they're in quite abundant supply. I'm sure those are the little ones I've seen like in the fall on my chrysanthemums, my asters, or they're just, you know, late in the season when they're still flowers. Small size lets them get into small flowers, daisy-like flowers, wildflowers. And like bumblebees, they use this buzz pollination or sonication, causing sonic vibrations that help release the pollen, you know, even in things like tomato flowers. Next slide. Reasons for decline in bee populations are probably the reason for decline in lots of different species. You know, the loss of habitat through urbanization, pesticide use, changing climates and disease, invasive species. So, you know, I think we know that's a pattern in lots of things. Next slide. So just some suggestions on how we can help our bees. Plant a variety of flowering trees, shrubs, and flowers. Make sure plants provide blooms from early spring to late fall. So you want to have, you know, something flowering through the seasons. They say to avoid frilly cultivars with double petals. It makes it more difficult for the bees to access the pollen. And to opt for open pollinated varieties of annuals, and add as many native species or native bees as you can, like redbuds, blueberries, coreopsis, coneflowers, Joe pieweed, liatris, asters, goldenrods. I'm sure you can think of a number of other native plants. And it recommends maybe clustering them in larger groups that makes foraging easier for the bee who is maybe focused on that one flower. Okay, next slide. I think we just have a few other suggestions. Avoid using pesticides, especially systemic pesticides that infiltrate all parts of the plant. And if you use pesticides, you know, try to select specific versus broad spectrum pesticides, you know, and, you know, always use the least toxic first. And remember that dandelions, clover, and other flowering weeds are really good food sources for bees, especially before other flowers are available. I'm trying really hard to leave those dandelions in my lawn, for example, and leave some areas mulch-free, as 70% of the bees nest underground. Others will take up residence in dried stems of plants, cavities of wood over winter. So again, try not to be too I guess a little messy maybe in your yard in the winter. Leave those things for bees and probably other insects as well. So next slide. I just didn't spend a lot of time on flies, but they really are considered the number 2 in the pollinator lineup, right behind bees. Many of them are small, short-bodied, big compound eyes, only 2 wings, what you sort of think about. And though they're not as efficient in transporting pollen, there's a vast number of them, so they make up the differences by their sheer numbers. It was interesting when I was looking, some flies are attracted to putrid smelling flowers, but the big thing that caught me was without flies, there would be no chocolate, and chocolate is one of my very, very favorite things, and fly pollinators assure fruit production for the cocoa trees. So they are important. And then I just was going to talk about one specific fly. If you could put the next slide up, Shirley. Next, can you put the next slide, Shirley? There should be one more, I think. Yes, the syrphid flies. They're the most numerous of pollinating flies. They're also called hoverflies, flower flies, and drone flies. And basically, they are the helicopter version of flying insects. They hovering mid-air. That's why some are called hoverflies. They dart quickly and can even fly backwards. They don't sting, but they mimic the bee. They have stripes on their abdomen that look like a bee or a wasp, so predators avoid them. They're great to have in the larvae form because they rival ladybugs in consuming aphids. And they're generalists. They visit a wide range of plant species. They like white and yellow flowers and pollinate a variety of fruit crops. And I think my next slide is just some of the references I used for this presentation.
Well, thank you, Shirley, and I'm glad to be here. And I will ask if you would please, I'll just let you know when I'm ready to move to the next slide.
Okay.
As Shirley said, I'm going to spend a few minutes this afternoon talking to you about butterflies and moths. Doing research for this presentation, I learned a lot, and what I'd like to do is share some and Shirley mentioned earlier that one of her favorite moths was the Luna moth. And there's a fun fact that I'm going to share with everybody about the Luna moth. You can see it here on the right of the title chart. It is one of the very few moths that have a very unique characteristic that makes it stand out amongst moths. Okay, Shirley, next chart, please. The really fun part about doing the research on butterflies and moths were just to find out that one, they belong to the same order. They're both of the order Lepidoptera. And in Virginia, there are about 55 different species of butterflies and about 400 different species of moths. Now, that is only significant in the sense that it's about the same ratio of moths, about between 7 and 9%, or 7 or 9 moth species per every butterfly species. But between moths and butterflies, there's about 100 and I'll just say 170, almost 180,000 different species of moths and butterflies in the world. Now, Sandra made a good point about flies earlier being a pollinator, but not as big of a pollinator or as effective a pollinator as bees. The same goes for butterflies and moths. And the reason for that, and I learned is that they simply can't carry as much pollen as a bee can. So again, in the case of flies, the butterflies and the moths are considered essential pollinators, not because they can carry a lot of pollen, but there are a lot of them to carry pollen. Now, the second thing I learned, what I thought was pretty interesting is that, and I didn't know this, butterflies pollinate and are active primarily during the day, and moths are primarily active pollinating during the night. So if you look at the pictures on this chart, on the left, you'll see the eastern tiger swallowtail. Here's a fun fact. It's the state insect of Virginia. Between this particular example of a butterfly and its caterpillar show the relationship between native plants and both from the adult moving in nectar, getting nectar and pollinating, and then the caterpillar using the leaves to grow and become an adult. On the right, you see a snowberry clearwing moth. Now, the fun fact about this one, and important, is that this moth is a member of the sphinx moth family, and the sphinx moth family are the outlier from the rule, the exception to the rule of pollinating at night. This is actually a day flyer, and they are active both day and night to varying degrees across their family. I mentioned the Luna moth earlier, and not only is it beautiful, but the Luna moth has one distinct characteristic that very few moths, that only moths in the silk moth family have. They don't have any mouth parts. They can't feed, so that they only live, as a result of that, they only live a few days as winged adults. It just gives them enough time to become adults, mate, and lay eggs. Not all moths are like this, just a very select few, but I thought it fascinating that they have adapted so that the moth, the adult, has adapted itself for purely mating and laying eggs. Butterflies and moths are generally seen as beneficial to the ecosystem, but when you talk about the caterpillars, it's kind of a mixed review. 96% of all North American land birds feed on arthropods. There's no other group of insects greater than the order of Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths, that provide as much food to other animals as this order of butterflies and moths. So as you can see, they really are not only essential pollinators, but now they are a huge source of food for a lot of different birds and other animals like rodents, bats, lizards, frogs, and even bears. The downside, if you want to look for look at caterpillars as a pest, I did find about 5 different examples in Virginia of butterfly and moth caterpillars that are considered to be pretty significant economic pests to growers of produce. And the one that I found to be most interesting was the diamondback moth caterpillar. It is considered to be the single most destructive pest worldwide to growers of cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, and any other vegetables in that family of vegetables. So here in Virginia, we have some really, really wonderful pollinators and food sources for other native animals. And we also have some very destructive caterpillars from these same adults that do have a severe or a significant impact upon growing produce here in the state and worldwide. Next chart, please. I want to thank Sandra for making a lot of good points on why the populations of bees and other arthropods are diminishing. And I think that the most important fact that we should focus on is loss of habitat. The use in the encroachment of invasive plants in cultivars. The impact is the same on butterflies and moths. The number of butterflies and moths you see in any one area is directly related to and directly correlated with the number of native plants in that habitat. Native plants provide the greatest, are the most robust group of plants that can provide acceptable hosts to the most, the greatest number of pollinators like butterflies and moths. And natives do that because, one, they are already adapted to our local weather patterns and soil profiles. They've evolved over time to provide for the native wildlife in Virginia and the United States. They tend to better withstand natural weather cycles, and they require less maintenance and resources overall. They are also incredible caterpillar factories. One good example is that goldenrods support 115 different types of caterpillars. That's impressive, but even more impressive is that native oaks support 532 different species of butterflies and moths. And then the final point in favor of native plants is really, again, the idea that native plants are essential and provide the best opportunity to turn around the decline of essential pollinators, bees, flies, and butterflies and moths. And in this case, I really want to foot stomp now that I've learned a little bit more, monarchs and the relationship between monarchs and milkweed. This relationship is really a symbiotic, and it's not unusual, but it's a symbiotic relationship between a butterfly and a plant. In this particular case, milkweed, as you all probably know, and I'm just learning, milkweed is the only acceptable host plant for the monarch larvae. And the more we plant milkweed, the more opportunity we have to restore and grow the monarch population. Luckily, there are a lot of milkweed varieties, and I'm sure you're familiar with the ones that we have here native to Virginia: common milkweed, swamp milkweed, and butterfly weed. So I hope I've been able to share with you the facts and the interesting and important facts that I learned about butterflies and moths, and also the relationship, the symbiotic relationship between the use of native plants and the sustaining and growing of these important populations of pollinators and food sources for other animals in the ecosystem. If you go to the next chart then, please, Shirley. I've included a short list of references All of these proved to be very rich in information. I really do recommend that you go to, if you want a very comprehensive summary of how to build your habitats, I really recommend you go to the Virginia Cooperative Extension resources and just click on this link or go to this link, because it'll take you straight to the paper this entitled "For the Birds, Butterflies and Hummingbirds Creating and Fighting Habitats." A lot of information. Everything here really did broaden my horizons, and I hope it will do the same for you.